Here we have a selection of wooden products. These are bamboo skewers, ice cream sticks, ice lolly sticks. I've got extra long matches, cocktail skewers, coffee stirrers. So they're all made of birch or beech, really useful for modelling. So utility knife as we use, safety ruler, compass, junior hacksaw with a 32 teeth blade, some bench hooks that I've made out of cardboard and skewers just to hold the wood, sanding block, bulldog clips for clamps. Okay, marking out a nice lolly stick, I just set the compass to half. When it meets the middle, then I can mark it on both sides. This marks the centre, so I'm just wanting to reduce the stick so it's a more usable section for my scaled model. Line it up with the safety rule on the mat and work your way through carefully with the utility knife. It takes a bit of cutting, it doesn't quite break, cut through it. Once it's folded, just sand it down and that separates the splinters. Now to make a connection, you could glue it, but you want to get it all in the same plane, so you make a little join in it and then we can retain that plane, and it works really well. It makes your modelling more adaptable. To do that, I'm going to use this one as a template. The first one, if you haven't got a template, you just have to mark it out with a pencil and a ruler. So I'm lining it up and I'm marking either side of the groove that I want to cut out with the utility knife. And I take my little bench hook and then using the junior hacksaw, I'm going to cut down those knife lines to about halfway through the wood section. Now the saw blade kerf is smaller than the groove, so it leaves a little bit inside. You just break that off with a knife and then use that as your template and mark out the second. So on these ice pop sticks, they're radiused at the end, so I'm keeping everything in the same plane so that all the radiuses are going to be in the same line. So I'm just I'm making each stick exactly the same because I want to create a square frame. If I wanted a rectangular frame, I would obviously do two sets of different size sticks. When you've got 4 sticks, you can connect them together. And that's our first frame. It's quite sturdy. You just use a square there to check for squareness. Add some glue into the joins, and while it dries, just check again for squareness and just alter the frame to suit until it fits in square. When it's square, just move it away so it doesn't dry onto it. Now I'm going to infill it. So this is just some black cardboard from a cardboard box, black on one side and cardboard colour on the other. Mark inside the frame and just cut it out with the utility knife. And when you've made 4 of them, you can create a little space. Okay, I'm going to try to bend these coffee stirrers. So some boiling water in a bowl, leave them to soak for a couple of minutes so they get quite flexible. You'll feel they're much more flexible. Then wrap them around a former, in this case an old can. Apply an elastic band to give it pressure and leave it to dry. Here's one I did earlier, and you can see there's a bit of spring back, but it's quite an even curve and it's stayed in position. You could laminate these two together and create a much stronger beam, or you just use them as is. Now I'm going to glue the ends of these skewers together to create a bigger section of bamboo to work with. So a bit of glue on the end and a bulldog clip just to hold that in position. I'm just using the sanding block just to square off the end so they're all in the same plane. When that's dry, I'm going to cut the ends down, so I'm cutting a nice square edge on the end of that block. So this is the part that we've glued, and I'm also, while they're stuck together, I'm going to take advantage of that and I'm going to put a join on the end of the skewers, just another halving joint. So I've just removed a little section, and that's going to be the thickness of a match, so the match will fit into that join there. I've just used a stick there to give a datum away from the edge of the section that I want to, the thicker section that I've glued up. Then on the sanding block, you can use a square piece of plywood to act as a sort of fence, and it helps to sand everything square and flush neatly. And do the same with this one. Again, using that as a spacer, that's the distance away that I want to cut and saw through. Once I've got them all sawn through, it's time to glue them onto my match. So I'm going to use that square as a block of plywood as a square for the first one. I'll glue that on first of all and let that dry. Then put a weight behind it, and now I'm using the popsicle ice lolly sticks as a gauge for the distance away, and that works out at 1 to 50 as at 500, so it means you're gluing them up at 600 centres, which is something that's used in the construction anyway, so that works well. Glue them into position, and now I'm going to glue another stick on the end there, keep them all level. I've just glued that on in position, but I needed to add an extra stick there to get the weight to hold, push down on the beam, because the beam was so flexible. Leave it underweight for a bit, and then that forms a really strong structure. I realised that if you cut the cardboard at diagonal, so diagonal to the corrugation, when you cut your square panels out, if you were doing this, it works much better because you're never cutting through the valley of the corrugation, which doesn't seem to cut very well. You're always cutting across the corrugation, and it creates a really crisp infill, cardboard infill for your frames. And that should fit into the frame. And just check. Like so. Okay, I'm going to put a plastic window in. So I've got this plastic dish that some fruit came in or something, and the squares on the bottom are really good. They look like those glass bricks that you can get, so I thought I'd make a wall of them, a panel of them in my panel. So just using a utility knife and straight edge to cut that, trim it to size, and I'm just working with the squares themselves. They look about the right size in scale, so that was perfect. Using the block of plywood to act as a square edge. So cut the window first. You have to put a lot of pressure onto that safety ruler to make it sure it doesn't slip the plastic underneath. Okay, and now I'm going to insert that into my cardboard panel. I'm just going to do that the same way as I worked on the previous tutorial with a compass to mark out the point of the compass marks out where the panel needs to go, and then you just cut between the points. I've used that ice lolly stick just to get a gauge from the parallel edge so it sits in parallel, and then use the point to mark all the way around the plastic, and then you just cut between those holes with your utility knife and straight edge. And that just sits in. And creates a nice glazed window into that space. Like so. Gluing them in, just glue along the edge of the cardboard all the way round. As neatly as possible. I used the same method to glue the plastic in. I'm just using PVA and it worked really well. There's not much movement there, it just held it in perfectly. Put the frame on top. And then use a skewer or stick to just clean off that glue residue, any surplus. And I used a little bit of black cardboard and it seemed to work really well. Clean off the residue. Okay, I'm going to cut out a door. So I've cut my cardboard door. I'm just going to mark it out with the compass pin point like I've done before. Then use the straight edge and utility knife to cut between the points. This works. I found it to work really well, especially cutting on that now the cardboard's going on the diagonal. It's created very clean cuts across. In the top. And that fits in. Lovely. That's great. So that can be glued in. Okay, so with those thicker sections that we glued up from the bamboo skewers, I'm going to glue two of them together now. So I've marked off on scale with the compass how far I want this tread to be, because this is like a stairway, and I've marked that off, and now I'm just put glue along the edge, and then I'm going to clamp them together with the bulldog clip. Get the glue on, get the clip on, and then reposition to your pencil line. It's quite difficult to stop the wood from slipping, the bamboo from slipping when you put that clamp on. But once the pressure's there, you've just got to reposition it and then just clean off that residue, and it works really well. And again, sand them up, use the piece of plywood to get a square edge, and then just add them together, each time just adding one, exactly the same method until you've built up however far you want to go. Glue on, I've gone off screen now, but yeah, glue on, bulldog clip on, leave it to dry a little, and then just use a skewer or stick just to clean off that glue residue. Okay, so these are what I've made. 4 panels. You could use them in any way you want. Some kind of roof structure maybe, or a floor structure or wall structure, and then gluing up to create some steps. So I'm going to keep going.